The evening air was cool and calm as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the small town on the outskirts of San Diego. A modest bar named Tom's Tavern stood at the edge of the main road, its neon sign flickering faintly in the twilight. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy but unremarkable. Wooden stools lined the counter, old jukebox tunes played softly in the background, and locals chatted about their day over cold beers. It wasn't fancy, but it had charm, or so most people thought. For Tom Reynolds, the gruff owner with a perpetual scowl etched onto his weathered face, it was just another Friday night. Marcus Thompson pushed open the heavy wooden door of the tavern, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light outside. He stepped inside, brushing off the chill from the ocean breeze that lingered on his skin. Marcus had spent months away from home, serving his country as a Navy SEAL in some of the toughest missions imaginable. Now, back on U.S. soil, he craved nothing more than a quiet drink to decompress. Dressed in jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap emblazoned with the SEAL insignia, Marcus walked in looking like any other customer. But there was something about him, an aura of quiet confidence, a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, choosing a spot where he could observe the room while staying out of the spotlight. The bartender, a wiry man in his 50s with thinning hair, glanced up briefly before returning to polishing glasses. Marcus ordered a beer, leaning back slightly as he waited for his drink. Around him, conversations buzzed. A group of construction workers laughed loudly at a joke. A couple whispered sweet nothings in the corner, and an older man sipped whiskey alone, lost in thought. It seemed like a typical night, uneventful and ordinary. But then, things began to shift subtly. At first, it was hard to pinpoint exactly what changed. Maybe it was the way Tom, who had been wiping down tables near the entrance, froze mid-motion when he spotted Marcus sitting at the bar. Or perhaps it was the sudden hush that fell over the nearest table of patrons as they noticed the newcomer. Whatever it was, Marcus felt it too. A ripple of unease in the otherwise relaxed vibe of the place. He didn't say anything, though. Instead, he kept his focus on the bottle in front of him, taking slow sips as if trying to blend into the scenery. Tom approached the bar moments later, his boots thudding heavily against the floorboards. He stopped directly behind Marcus, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "You're gonna have to leave," he said abruptly, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. The words hung in the air, unexpected and jarring. Marcus turned slowly, his dark eyes meeting Tom's steely gaze. "Excuse me?" he asked calmly, his tone measured despite the tension crackling between them. "You heard me," Tom replied, his jaw tightening. "We don't want trouble here." Marcus raised an eyebrow, confusion written across his face. "I'm not causing any trouble, I'm just having a drink." Tom hesitated, glancing around the room as if seeking support from the other customers. When none came, he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Look, this isn't personal, okay? But we've got standards here, you understand?" If Marcus was offended, he didn't show it. Instead, he set his beer down carefully, his movements deliberate. "Standards?" he repeated, his voice steady. "What kind of standards are those?" Tom straightened up, his face reddening as he struggled to find the right words. "Let's just say, you're not really our type of crowd." The implication hit Marcus like a punch to the gut, but outwardly, he remained composed. He knew exactly what Tom meant. It wasn't about standards at all. This was something deeper, uglier. Prejudice masked as policy. Still, Marcus chose not to argue. There was no point in escalating the situation. These were fights better fought elsewhere. So, with a final glance at the hostile bar owner, he slid off his stool, leaving a few bills on the counter before heading toward the exit. As he walked out, the silence in the bar grew heavier, almost suffocating. No one spoke as the door swung shut behind him, though several pairs of eyes followed his retreating figure. Outside, Marcus paused for a moment, letting the cool night air wash over him. He shook his head, exhaling deeply as he climbed into his truck. As much as he tried to shrug it off, the sting of rejection lingered. It wasn't the first time he'd faced discrimination, but each encounter left its mark, reminding him that even heroes weren't immune to prejudice. Little did Marcus know, however, that this incident wouldn't end quietly. Word travels fast, among brothers in arms, especially within the tight-knit ranks of the Navy SEALs, and by morning, his story would ignite a chain reaction that neither Tom nor anyone else in that bar could have anticipated. By the time Marcus pulled into his driveway that night, his mind was still replaying the events at Tom's Tavern. The sting of being turned away wasn't just about the bar. It was the weight of knowing he'd been judged not for who he was, but for how he looked. Still, Marcus didn't dwell on it for long. He had learned early in life that anger only clouded judgment, and as a Navy SEAL, clarity was everything. Instead, he decided to let it go, chalking it up to another unfortunate encounter in a world that wasn't always fair, but fate had other plans. Later that evening, Marcus called his best friend and fellow SEAL teammate Ryan "Doc" Carter. Doc was more than just a comrade. He was the glue that held their tight-knit unit together. Whether it was patching up wounds during missions or offering advice over late-night phone calls, Doc had a knack for making things right. When Marcus recounted what happened at the bar, his tone was calm, almost dismissive, as if trying to downplay the situation. But Doc wasn't having it. "What do you mean he kicked you out?" Doc asked, his voice rising with disbelief. "For no reason? Did he even give you an explanation?" Marcus sighed, leaning back against his couch. "Not really, just some
vague stuff about standings and crowds. You can read between the lines."
There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Doc exploded. "That's bull. Are you serious? After everything you've done for this country, for all of us, and some jerk thinks he can treat you like garbage because of the color of your skin? No way, man, we're not letting this slide." Marcus chuckled despite himself. "Relax, Doc, it's not worth it. I'm fine." "Fine doesn't cut it," Doc shot back. "This isn't just about you, Marcus. This is about respect, about standing up for what's right. If we don't say something, then what kind of message does that send?" The conviction in Doc's voice was hard to ignore. Marcus appreciated the sentiment, but he also knew that confronting Tom wouldn't change much. People like him weren't easily swayed by arguments or appeals to morality. Still, he couldn't deny that Doc had a point. What happened wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. And if left unaddressed, it could embolden others to act the same way. Word spread quickly after that call. By morning, the entire SEAL team knew about Marcus's experience at the bar. They were stationed at a nearby base, preparing for their next mission, but news of the incident became the topic of conversation during breakfast. Some teammates were visibly angry, slamming fists on tables and muttering under their breath. Others listened quietly, their expressions darkening as they absorbed the details. Each member of the team felt the insult deeply, not because it happened to Marcus alone, but because it represented a broader disrespect toward everyone who wore the uniform. Captain Hayes, the leader of their unit, broke the silence first. A seasoned veteran with decades of service under his belt, Hayes was known for his steady demeanor and sharp mind. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table as he addressed the group. "Listen up, everyone. I know how you feel about this. Trust me, I do. But before we jump into anything, let's think carefully about what we want to achieve here. Is it revenge? Because that's not who we are. Or is it something bigger?" The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Revenge wasn't their style. As SEALs, they were trained to operate with precision, discipline, and purpose. Every action they took, whether on the battlefield or in civilian life, had meaning. This was no different. They weren't just soldiers. They were role models, ambassadors of the values they fought to protect: honor, integrity, and equality. "So, what's the plan, Captain?" asked Jax, one of the younger members of the team. His eagerness was palpable, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. Hayes smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the room. "We show them exactly who Marcus is and who we are. Not through threats or violence, but through truth. Let's make sure they understand the kind of man they treated so poorly. And let's remind them, and ourselves, that our strength lies in unity." The idea resonated instantly. Over the next few hours, the team huddled together, brainstorming ways to turn the situation into a teachable moment. They decided to visit Tom's Tavern en masse the following evening, not to intimidate, but to educate. Each member would share stories about Marcus, the sacrifices he made, the lives he saved, the leadership he demonstrated time and again. They wanted to paint a picture of the real Marcus Thompson, not the caricature Tom had imagined when he ejected him from the bar. As the day wore on, excitement mingled with determination among the team. For many of them, this wasn't just about supporting a brother in arms. It was about reclaiming a sense of dignity that had been stripped away. They had faced countless dangers together, risking their lives for causes greater than themselves. Now they were stepping up once again, not on foreign soil but in their own backyard. That night, as Marcus prepared for bed, his phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from his teammates. "We've got your back," one read. "Tomorrow we settle this the right way," said another. Reading those words, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude and pride. He had always known his team stood beside him, but seeing their unwavering support in action reminded him why they were more than co-workers. They were family. Sleep came easier that night despite the lingering tension. Marcus drifted off thinking about the power of solidarity, about how a single act of discrimination could spark a movement for change. He didn't know yet what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. Whatever happened, he wouldn't face it alone. The sun dipped below the horizon once again, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of San Diego. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of salt from the nearby ocean. As dusk settled in, Tom's Tavern came alive with its usual Friday night energy. Locals trickled in, taking their familiar spots at the bar or around the scattered tables. The jukebox hummed softly in the background, playing a mix of country tunes and old rock classics. It was business as usual, or so it seemed. At exactly 7:30 p.m., the heavy wooden door swung open, drawing the attention of everyone inside. 12 men walked in, their presence immediately commanding the room. They weren't loud or boisterous, instead they moved with a quiet confidence that demanded respect. Dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, boots, leather jackets, they looked like ordinary guys grabbing drinks after work, but there was something about them, an unspoken authority in the way they carried themselves that made heads turn. Tom Reynolds, who had been wiping down glasses behind the bar, stopped mid-motion. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the group, his instincts telling him these weren't regular patrons. He recognized a few of them instantly. Their military bearing gave them away. Soldiers, Marines, maybe even SEALs. Whatever they weren't here for small talk. Tom swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Evening," one of the men said casually, tipping an imaginary hat as he led the group toward the center of the bar. This was Captain Hayes, the leader of Marcus's SEAL team. His voice was calm, but firm, carrying just enough weight to make Tom uneasy. Without waiting for a response, the group spread out, claiming seats at various tables and along the bar. Within moments, the tavern felt smaller, the air thicker as if the walls themselves were closing in. The other customers exchanged nervous glances, unsure what to make of the sudden influx of strangers. Some whispered among themselves, speculating whether this was some kind of military gathering or perhaps a celebration. Others simply stared, intrigued by the aura of discipline and camaraderie radiating from the newcomers. One thing was clear: no one in the room could ignore them. Tom forced a smile, plastering on his best customer service face as he approached the nearest table. "Welcome, gentlemen," he said, his tone overly cheerful. "What can I get? You tonight?" Captain Hayes glanced up, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Tom's. "Beer for now," he replied evenly, "and maybe a round of shots for the team." Tom nodded quickly, retreating to the bar to fetch the order. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. These men weren't here for drinks. They had a purpose, though he couldn't yet guess what it was. His mind raced as he slid pints and shot glasses across the counter, each movement deliberate but tinged with unease. Meanwhile, the SEALs began weaving their plan into action. Doc, sitting closest to the bar, struck up a conversation with a couple of locals seated nearby. "You ever meet a guy named Marcus Thompson?" he asked casually, sipping his beer. The question caught the pair off guard, and they shook their heads. "Navy SEAL," Doc continued, leaning back slightly. "One of the bravest guys I've ever known. Saved my life more times than I can count." Intrigued, the locals leaned in closer. "Really? What did he do?" one of them asked. Doc smiled faintly, his expression softening as memories flooded back. "Well, let me tell you about the time we were pinned down in hostile territory. Enemy fire coming from every direction. No way out." Marcus didn't hesitate. He charged straight into the chaos, neutralized the threat, and got us all to safety. Didn't think twice about putting himself in harm's way. That's the kind of man he is. The story resonated deeply, and soon others nearby joined the conversation, eager to hear more. At another table, Jax recounted a mission where Marcus had single-handedly repaired a damaged communication system under fire, ensuring the team could call for reinforcements. Across the room, Captain Hayes shared how Marcus had mentored younger recruits, teaching them not only tactical skills but also the importance of teamwork and integrity. Each story painted a vivid picture of Marcus, not just as a soldier, but as a leader, a protector, and a friend. The patrons listened intently, their initial curiosity turning into admiration. Some nodded approvingly, while others exchanged glances, clearly moved by what they were hearing. By the time the second round of drinks arrived, the entire bar was buzzing with tales of Marcus's heroism. Tom, still hovering near the bar, couldn't help but overhear snippets of the conversations. His hands trembled slightly as he poured beers, guilt gnawing at him. He remembered the man he'd ejected just the night before, the quiet, respectful customer who hadn't caused any trouble. Was this the same guy? Could he have misjudged him so completely? The thought weighed heavily on him, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on keeping the drinks flowing. As the evening wore on, the SEALs shifted gears subtly. They weren't just sharing stories anymore, they were making a statement. Every word, every gesture, reinforced the message they had come to deliver. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a Navy SEAL. He was a symbol of everything the military stood for: courage, sacrifice, and unity. And treating him poorly wasn't just an insult to him, it was an affront to the values they all held dear. By the time the clock struck 9, the mood in the bar had shifted entirely. What started as a tense standoff had transformed into something powerful, a collective realization that prejudice had no place in their community. The SEALs had achieved their goal without raising their voices or throwing punches. Their presence alone had spoken volumes, reminding everyone present of the strength found in standing together. But the night wasn't over yet. There was still one person who needed to hear the message loud and clear: Tom Reynolds. And as Captain Hayes signaled, for the final phase of their plan, the bar owner braced himself, knowing full well that the hardest part was yet to come. As the night deepened and the stories about Marcus continued to circulate around Tom's tavern, Captain Hayes signaled subtly to his team. It was time to confront Tom directly. The atmosphere in the bar had shifted dramatically. What began as curiosity and admiration for Marcus had evolved into a palpable sense of unease directed toward the bar owner. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people pieced together what might happen next. Everyone knew something was coming, but no one dared interrupt. Hayes stood up slowly, his tall frame drawing immediate attention. He didn't shout or make a scene. Instead, he walked calmly toward the bar where Tom was busy refilling drink orders. His movements were deliberate, each step radiating authority without aggression. When he reached the counter, he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the polished wood. "Tom," he said evenly, his voice carrying just enough weight to silence the nearby chatter. "We need to talk." Tom froze mid-pour, his hands gripping the bottle tighter than necessary. He glanced at Hayes, then quickly looked away, avoiding eye contact. "What's this about?" he asked, feigning nonchalance, though his voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. "It's about Marcus Thompson," Hayes replied, his tone firm but measured. You remember him, right? The guy you kicked out last night? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and impossible to ignore. Tom hesitated, glancing around the room. Every face was turned toward him now, some curious, others accusatory. Even the jukebox seemed quieter, as if the entire bar was holding its breath. Finally, he cleared his throat and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, sure, I remember him. Nice fella. Just wasn't a good fit for the place, you know? No, I don't know, Hayes countered, his voice cutting through Tom's weak attempt at justification. Care to explain what you mean by not a good fit? Tom shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming against the countertop. Look, it's my business. I run things how I see fit. No offense meant. The murmurs in the background grew, louder, and Tom could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him. Hayes crossed his arms, leaning in closer. No offense meant? Really? Because from where we're standing, it looks like you treated a decorated Navy SEAL, a man who has risked his life for this country, like he didn't deserve to sit in your bar. That sound about right? Tom opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. Hayes wasn't yelling or threatening him. He didn't need to. The sheer force of his conviction and the silent support of the other SEALs scattered throughout the room was enough to leave Tom scrambling for an explanation. I didn't know he was a SEAL, he stammered finally, clutching at the first excuse that came to mind. That doesn't matter, Doc interjected, stepping forward from his seat near the bar. His voice was calm but sharp, like a blade, slicing through fog. Even if he wasn't a SEAL, he's still a human being. Still someone who deserves respect. Or are you saying only certain kinds of people are welcome here? Tom's face flushed red, sweat beading on his forehead. It's not like that, he protested weakly. I've got regulars to think about, standards to uphold. Standards? Jax chimed in, joining the conversation with a sardonic grin. You call treating someone like dirt because of the color of their skin a standard? Is that what you teach your kids, your grandkids? The bar fell silent again, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Tom's shoulders slumped as the truth of their words hit home. For years, he'd justified his biases, telling himself they weren't personal, that he was just protecting his turf. But hearing them laid bare now, in front of strangers and neighbors alike, made it impossible to deny. He glanced around the room, searching for allies, but all he saw were disappointed faces staring back at him. Captain Hayes let the silence linger for a moment before speaking again. This isn't about revenge, Tom. We're not here to ruin your business or drag you through the mud. We're here because you owe Marcus, and everyone else in this room, an apology. And more importantly, you owe it to yourself to do better, Tom. Swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. An apology won't fix anything, he muttered under his breath. It's a start, Hayes replied firmly. Change always starts somewhere. You can either learn from this and grow, or you can dig your heels in and keep making the same mistakes. Your choice. For a long moment, Tom said nothing. The weight of the situation bore down on him, forcing him to confront the ugliness of his actions. He thought about the stories he'd overheard earlier, the tales of bravery, sacrifice, and leadership that painted Marcus as far more than just another customer. He thought about the men standing before him now, united in their mission to stand, up for what was right. Most of all, he thought about how empty his so-called standards really were when stripped of their pretense. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tom straightened up. His voice was shaky but sincere as he addressed the room. I messed up, he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. Marcus didn't deserve to be treated the way I treated him. None of you do. I let my own issues get in the way. And I'm sorry for that. Truly sorry. The admission broke the tension in the room, releasing a collective exhale from the patrons. Some nodded approvingly, while others exchanged relieved smiles. Hayes gave Tom a long, appraising look before, nodding once, apology accepted for now. But remember, actions speak louder than words. Show us you mean it. Tom nodded vigorously, his expression earnest. I will. I promise. With that, the confrontation ended, not with anger or violence, but with accountability. As the SEALs returned to their seats, the mood in the bar shifted once again. Conversations resumed, lighter and more hopeful this time. People laughed, clinked glasses, and shared stories of their own, inspired by the courage it took for both sides to confront the issue head-on. For the first time that evening, Tom's Tavern truly felt like a community, a place where differences could be acknowledged and overcome, rather than ignored or feared. And though the night was far from over, one thing was clear. Change had already begun. The air in Tom's Tavern felt different now, lighter, almost electric with the promise of renewal. After Tom's public apology, the SEALs didn't linger on the confrontation. Instead, they shifted their focus to something more constructive, turning the evening into an opportunity for connection and healing. It wasn't enough to simply call out wrongdoing. They wanted to leave behind a lasting impact, one that would ripple through the community long after they were gone. Captain Hayes stood up from his seat near the bar and raised a hand, signaling for quiet. The room hushed almost instantly, everyone eager to hear what he had to say next. We came here tonight not just to address what happened yesterday, he began, his voice steady and warm, but to remind ourselves, and each other, of the values we should all strive to live by. Respect, integrity, unity. These aren't just words, they're actions, and sometimes it takes stepping back to see how far we've drifted from them. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Marcus Thompson is more than a Navy SEAL. He's a brother, a son, a friend. He's someone who has given everything to protect this country, including people like you and me. But tonight isn't just about Marcus. It's about all of us, about recognizing our shared humanity and deciding to do better. For ourselves, for our families, and for future generations. His speech struck a chord with the crowd. Some patrons nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears, moved by the sincerity in his tone. Even Tom, standing behind the bar with his head bowed, seemed to absorb every word. For years he'd allowed fear and prejudice to dictate his decisions, but hearing Hayes articulate the importance of empathy and understanding made him realize how much he'd been missing, not just as a business owner, but as a person. Doc took over from there, stepping forward with a grin that lit up the room. Now let's lighten things up a bit, shall we? He said, raising his glass. Here's to second chances and to making sure no one walks into this bar ever feeling unwelcome again. The crowd erupted into applause, glasses clinking together as laughter filled the space. It was a moment of genuine camaraderie, one that dissolved the lingering tension and replaced it with hope. But the SEALs weren't done yet. As the night wore on, they proposed an idea that would transform Tom's Tavern into something greater than its current self. Captain Hayes approached Tom once again, this time with a suggestion rather than an accusation. Tom, he said, his tone friendly but earnest, how about hosting a fundraiser here next month, something to support veteran causes or local charities? Not only will it bring the community together, but it'll also show everyone that you're committed to change. Tom blinked in surprise, caught off guard by the offer. You mean use my bar for something like that? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Exactly, Hayes replied with a nod. It's a chance to rewrite the narrative, to show people that this place isn't just four walls and a neon sign. It's a hub where good things can happen, where lives can be touched. What do you say? For a moment, Tom hesitated. The idea was bold, ambitious even, and it required him to step outside his comfort zone. But as he looked around the room, at the faces of neighbors, friends, and strangers alike, all united by a single purpose, he felt a spark of determination ignite within him. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice firm despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. I'll make it happen. The announcement was met with cheers, and soon the entire bar buzzed with excitement. Patrons began brainstorming ideas for the event, suggesting everything from live music to raffles to silent auctions. One woman offered to bake pies for the occasion, while another promised to reach out to local businesses for donations. Even the older man who had sat quietly sipping whiskey earlier volunteered to help organize logistics. In that moment, Tom's tavern transformed from a simple watering hole into a beacon of possibility, a place where people could come together to celebrate, heal, and grow. As the evening drew to a close, the SEALs prepared to leave, their mission accomplished. Before heading out, Marcus stepped forward, addressing the crowd for the first time that night. His presence commanded attention, though his words were humble and heartfelt. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, his deep voice resonating through the room. "This means more to me than I can put into words. But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about all of us choosing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. That's true strength." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the walls and filling the space with warmth. As Marcus shook hands with Tom and exchanged hugs with his teammates, it was clear that something profound had shifted, not just in the bar, but in the hearts of everyone present. In the days that followed, Tom threw himself into planning the fundraiser with a level of enthusiasm that surprised even him. He reached out to local veterans organizations, enlisted volunteers from the community, and worked tirelessly to ensure the event would be a success. Flyers went up around town, inviting residents to join in celebrating unity and gratitude. Slowly but surely, the tavern became known not for exclusion, but for inclusion, a testament to the power of redemption and collective effort. And when the night of the fundraiser finally arrived, the transformation was undeniable. The bar was packed with people from all walks of life, united by a shared goal. There were speeches, performances, and heartfelt tributes to those who had served. At one point, Tom took the stage himself, thanking the SEALs for holding him accountable and vowing to keep the spirit of inclusivity alive long after the event ended. By the end of the evening, donations poured in, exceeding everyone's expectations. More importantly, relationships were forged, bridges were built, and a sense of belonging blossomed in a place where it had once been absent. For Marcus and his team, it was proof that standing together could create real, meaningful change. And for Tom, it was a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage could lead to something extraordinary. As the last notes of music faded and the crowd dispersed, the tavern stood as a symbol of resilience, a place where mistakes were acknowledged, lessons were learned, and new beginnings were embraced. Weeks passed, and the impact of that transformative night at Tom's Tavern continued to ripple through the small coastal community. What had started as a confrontation rooted in prejudice had blossomed into something far greater, a movement toward unity, understanding, and shared purpose. The fundraiser event became the talk of the town, not just for its success in raising money, but for how it brought people together from all walks of life. Strangers who had never spoken before now exchanged greetings on the street. Families who once avoided the tavern began frequenting it regularly. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been given a second chance, not just Tom or Marcus, but everyone. Tom's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. Gone was the gruff, guarded man who had let his biases dictate his actions. In his place stood someone determined to make amends and prove he could be better. He took pride in running what he now called a bar for everyone, going out of his way to ensure no one felt unwelcome. Whether it was hanging a sign by the door that read, "All are welcome here," or hosting weekly trivia nights where locals could bond over friendly competition, Tom worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Patrons often remarked on how much warmer and inviting the atmosphere felt, and many thanked him personally for turning the tavern into a true community hub. Marcus, too, found himself reflecting deeply on everything that had transpired. At first, he had dismissed the incident with Tom as yet another unfortunate encounter in a world full of them. But seeing the way his teammates rallied around him, and the way the community responded to their message, reminded him of the power of standing together. It wasn't just about calling out wrongs. It was about creating opportunities for growth and connection. Marcus carried this lesson with him wherever he went, whether it was during training exercises with his SEAL team or while mentoring younger recruits. He realized that leadership wasn't just about commanding respect, it was about inspiring others to see beyond their differences and work toward a common goal. The SEAL team, meanwhile, remained as tight-knit as ever, strengthened by the experience. They had always been brothers in arms, bound by the sacrifices they made and the dangers they faced together. But confronting injustice in their own backyard reminded them that their mission extended beyond combat zones. Their strength lay not only in their ability to protect but also in their capacity to inspire change. From then on, they made it a point to engage more actively with their community, volunteering at local schools, participating in charity runs, and sharing their stories to encourage dialogue about equality and acceptance. Each action reinforced the idea that heroes weren't defined solely by their feats in battle. They were shaped by the lives they touched along the way. For the patrons of Tom's Tavern, the lessons learned that night lingered long after the last drink was poured. Conversations sparked during the fundraiser continued in homes, workplaces, and parks across the town. Parents used the story as a teaching moment for their children, emphasizing the importance of treating others with kindness and fairness. Friends challenged each other to confront their own biases and consider how small actions could have big consequences. Even those who hadn't attended the event felt its effects, as word spread about the positive changes happening in their community. It was a reminder that progress wasn't always loud or dramatic. It often began quietly with a single step forward. One evening, several weeks after the fundraiser, Marcus returned to Tom's Tavern, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he wanted to see how things were going. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, he was greeted by a scene that warmed his heart. The bar was alive with laughter and chatter, the jukebox playing a lively tune that seemed to lift everyone's spirits. Tom spotted him immediately and hurried over, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Marcus," he exclaimed, extending a hand. "Good to see you, man. Come on in." Marcus shook his hand firmly, noting the sincerity in Tom's voice. "Thanks, Tom. Looks like business is good." "It's better than good," Tom replied, gesturing to the bustling room. "We've got regulars coming in every night and new faces too. People are talking about us like we're some kind of landmark now." He chuckled softly, then added, "I owe a lot of that to you and your team." Marcus shook his head modestly. "You did the hard work, Tom. All we did was give you a nudge." "A nudge I needed," Tom admitted, his expression softening. "Listen, I know I can't undo what happened, but I hope you know I'm serious about making things right. This place, it's different now. Better. And I want you to feel at home here whenever you come by." The words meant more to Marcus than he let on. He nodded, offering Tom a grateful smile. "I appreciate that." "Really?" As Marcus settled into a seat at the bar, he couldn't help but notice how seamlessly he blended in with the crowd. No one stared or whispered. Instead, several patrons greeted him warmly, thanking him for inspiring such a positive shift in the community. One older man even raised his glass in a silent toast, a gesture Marcus returned with a nod. For the first time since stepping foot in the tavern months ago, he truly felt like he belonged. Later that night, when the crowd thinned and the noise level dropped, Marcus found himself sitting with Doc and Jax, who had joined him unexpectedly. They reminisced about the events of the past few weeks, laughing at inside jokes and marveling at how much had changed. Eventually, the conversation turned reflective. "You know," Doc said thoughtfully, swirling the remnants of his beer in its glass, "this whole thing reminded me why I signed up in the first place. Yeah, we fight for freedom and security, but it's bigger than that. We fight so people can live without fear of each other, fear of being treated unfairly. Seeing this community come together, that's what it's all about." Jax nodded, in agreement. "And it proves something else too. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Tonight showed us that people are willing to listen, to grow, if you give them the chance." Marcus listened quietly, absorbing their words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet conviction. "It's easy to focus on the bad stuff, the hate, the ignorance. But there's goodness too, even in places you least expect it. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one decision, to remind people of that. The three men sat in companionable silence after that, watching as Tom moved. Between tables, chatting with customers and ensuring everyone felt welcome. Outside, the ocean breeze swept through the streets, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared entirely, they never would, but they had become part of a larger story, one of resilience, redemption, and hope. As Marcus finished his drink and prepared to leave, he glanced around the tavern one last time. It wasn't perfect, and neither was the world beyond its walls. But it was proof that even in the face of adversity, people could rise above. Together, they could create spaces where everyone belonged, and maybe, just maybe, inspire others to do the same. With a final nod to Tom and his teammates, Marcus stepped out into the cool night air, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing he wouldn't have to face them alone.